Welcome to our latest installment of ABL Advisors video series featuring thought leaders from the commercial finance industry. I'd like to welcome our guest today, J. Scott Victor, founding partner and managing director of SSG Capital Advisors. Thanks for being here today, Scott.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. I'd like to start right in with today's questions in our interview today. And what we're going to focus on today is how the current economic environment is impacting the middle market from the viewpoint of an investment banking firm such as SSG, specializing in special situations. But before I get into that, why don't you take a moment, if you can, just to tell our viewers a little bit about SSG Capital Advisors.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So hopefully everybody knows SSG Capital Advisors. We're a boutique independent investment bank based out here in the suburbs of Philadelphia, the center of the universe. And Mike is also out here, which I didn't know. And we only do special situation transactions. We have 13 professionals. We started the firm almost 20 years ago in 2001. We've done almost 400 transactions closed since then. And all of our transactions are either selling a company facing challenges or refinancing a company facing challenges. The vast majority of that is selling companies, and about 25% of our work is financing companies out of their troubles to live another day.
Okay, thank you. That's a great outline of what you folks are doing. And almost 20 years in business, not an easy thing to say in today's environment.
I know, for a boutique firm, that's pretty amazing.
I would totally agree with that.
Almost the same people all these 20 years too.
And you've continued to grow throughout as well too, which is spectacular. 400
all
transactions. Good. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in with the first question, if you're all right with that. And that is, and while it may seem like an obvious question, I'm going to ask it anyway, because I want to get your insights on this. How would you characterize the level of distress in the middle market pre-pandemic versus today, considering that we're 9 months into this situation?
Okay, well, let's start pre-pandemic. So before COVID happened, obviously there's always companies in the mid to lower middle market that are facing challenges because there's several constants in the universe: over leverage, bad management, and many times just industry headwinds in a particular industry. So we here at SSG and just about everybody that does special situations has never had a slow day in our entire career, because there's always challenges that mid to lower middle market companies face. When COVID hit back in March, it went to a whole new level. So from March through the beginning of October was absolute insanity at SSG. I personally was working on 8 Chapter 11s and 4 situations outside of Chapter 11 at the same time, which is just a tremendous case volume. But once COVID hit, the restaurant chains immediately filed. Retailers immediately filed. Those in food services were in significant trouble. So all those types of cases that we got signed up on immediately after COVID hit. So March and April and May were just tremendously busy with new signups to try to get deals done on a very expedited basis because there was no cash flow. So the lenders were demanding to get out quickly. There was no cash flow at the company since everyone was shut down literally from March through May everywhere around the country. So we were exceedingly busy at the very initial stages of the pandemic to get deals done. And they all got done. By and large, everything that we signed up from March through May has now been closed, which is really remarkable. Many had to be transacted through a 363 sale in a Chapter 11, even did one under subchapter 5 of Chapter 11, because under the CARES Act, the minimum debt held by a company qualifying for subchapter 5 was increased to $7.5 million. it should be even higher than that because it's very efficient process. But it was very, very busy times for everybody in special situations from really March through the end of the third quarter.
Okay, so that's interesting because, and you mentioned that the lenders wanted out, and there's been some anecdotal discussions out there that many lenders have taken a more patient approach to the working capital issues that many of these middle market companies are facing because they've been given support through the CARES Act and some relaxation of loan classification rules by bank regulators and such. So would you say that that is true, that there has been some sort of a more patient approach, or was your experience actually opposite? And that is that they really wanted to get out?
Well, I think it's both true and false. So for the main money center lender banks, the largest banks, yes, they were more patient than previously. Many of their borrowers received PPP money, which was a godsend. Many of their borrowers were facing challenges even before COVID, but many of the money center lender banks were pretty darn patient, I'd have to say. But that's not the same for the asset-based lenders and the BDCs, because number one, they didn't have bank regulations because they're not banks. And when they saw a situation that they want out of, especially for borrowers that had zero revenue coming in from March to May when the world was shut down, they were not shy about asking their borrower to find another solution. And that solution was either a refi if possible, which the capital markets are still very open to this day, and they were throughout the pandemic, or through a sale, which is usually what we see in the mid to lower middle market. So both answers are correct and both answers are wrong. Big banks with bigger companies as borrowers, yes, definitely patient. And they continue to be patient through, I think, the end of the fourth quarter this year. But asset-based lenders, commercial finance companies, less patient.
Okay. And obviously, you're seeing this across many industries. You mentioned
Yes.
Restaurant and such, but are you seeing it in industries such as manufacturing, distribution? Are you seeing it across the board in the less obvious ones that we're always hearing about, which is retail and some hospitality and such?
Yes. So manufacturing, yes. We closed on a manufacturing sale. Their lender was a commercial finance company. They absolutely wanted it out. It was a Chapter 11, and we got it sold in the middle of the pandemic, which was really remarkable. Another commercial finance company I'm working with now, the borrower is a large broadline food distributor, and the company was not meeting its covenants pre-COVID. It got a lot worse post-COVID. And we're at the brink now of closing a sale by the end of this month. So that'll take out the commercial finance company at Par Plus. So that's good. So it's across all industries: healthcare, food distribution, restaurant chains, retail, manufacturing, energy, everything.
Smattering of everything, obviously. So
Yes.
And then you mentioned something else that kind of caught my attention. That was that your business is typically mostly on the sales side and also on the restructuring side.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been doing both throughout the crisis, this COVID-19 crisis. But is there more activity in one area than the other right now? And has that flip-flopped in any way because of the crisis? Was it more restructuring than sales right now?
No, for us, it's always the bulk of our business is M&A. Always.
It is.
Yeah. But I did say is the capital markets are still strong. So if there's a client of ours that can be refinanced, it is possible. And we are working on some refinancing possibilities. It just depends, obviously, on the company, the particular company and the business that they're doing and how well they're doing by maintaining their cash flow. But traditionally, and even through the pandemic, I'd say 75 to 80% of SSG's business is sell-side M&A.
Okay, that's interesting. There's been some reports that that's slowed down, but you're seeing high activity there.
Yeah, in the mid to lower middle market, it never slows down because companies are always facing challenges. Even in the best of times, there's always too much debt. There's often particular industry headwinds due to tariffs or whatever political is going on in the world, and bad operations sometimes. You can have a company, many companies still believe that increasing top line despite margin loss is going to fix all wounds. It doesn't.
And it's interesting, as a former financial analyst, it's never worked.
Never will.
Margins are the key, and that's just the way it's always going to be.
Right. If you're losing money on every item that's going out the door of your business, you're not going to make it up in volume.
No, volume does not cure all sins, that's for sure. Which actually brings me to the due diligence side of this a little bit, and the part about, whether or not the due diligence process has been impacted by this unique environment. And to clarify that, there's been many middle market companies that we talked about that received the government stimulus package support through the PPP program, CARES Act, whatever the different packages were that were available. Because of that, they've been injected with liquidity to a certain degree, and that could change the due diligence process in looking at these transactions. Has it impacted the way that you're looking at transactions versus the past? And do you have to look at them more closely now?
So there's a couple questions built into that. So number one, plain old-fashioned M&A diligence. It's very hard to do diligence when you can't get on an airplane and go visit your target company. So we had a sale earlier this year, literally in the middle of COVID, and we had a foreign buyer. We had a Belgian buyer that participated in the 363 auction. They couldn't come to the United States to do any diligence whatsoever. They couldn't go on site. Everything was via Zoom, via the data room, and they still came in and they bought it. It was amazing. So we've sold, I don't know, a dozen companies now or more post-COVID. The diligence always got done. Sometimes there were site visits. Oftentimes there were not. Like in the restaurant chains that we were able to sell, there were no site visits at all. Everything was shut down. What was there to see? Tables and chairs. But there were buyers out there that participated in the sale process and were able to close without physically going on site, which was really remarkable. But by and large, people are still doing some on-site diligence, trains, planes, cars, whatever, to get it done. But from the day-to-day diligence side, deals are still getting done. The second question you raise is about the CARES Act and the PPP money, and now the Main Street Lending Program. It is clear the PPP money was a godsend to just about everybody. We had some clients who didn't even go for PPP money. I'm not sure why. Some of the restaurant chains never even sought PPP money. It would have helped them. Other clients did get PPP money that absolutely positively kept them alive for 2 months during the heart of the crisis. And then they could start building up their revenue again as more and more of their customers were reopening. So PPP was a godsend. Did it affect the valuation of companies? Not in our world. Our world, everything's distressed anyway. So, the PPP money was used to keep a business alive so it could get to a sale. Main Street Lending has turned out to be very, very hard to get. We have a client right now that's trying to get a pretty good size Main Street loan, and it's tough. The underwriting is brutal, and some banks just don't want to participate in Main Street Lending. But as far as did that impact valuations? No, not at all, because most of the companies we sell are negative EBITDA anyway.
Okay, well, and again, you're playing in that distressed market, that special situation side of it. And so when you're getting into this whole part of the market, you're looking at, let's talk about the M&A market, which you mentioned a little bit earlier, from the special situation that you're dealing with here. Are there new hurdles that these middle market companies have to overcome in order to be attractive to a potential buyer when we're talking about the market that SSG is playing in?
Well, in our market, mostly the seller doesn't have a choice but to sell. They can't be refinanced. Restructuring is really not available because that's for a much larger deal when you have multiple tranches of debt and equity, and you can shift debt and equity in a restructuring. In mid to lower middle market companies, many that are family owned, many that are private equity owned, you just don't have that luxury of restructuring the balance sheet. Just doesn't exist. So you either refinance, you fix the company through a forbearance with your lender operationally, or it's sold. Those are the choices, or it's liquidated. I mean, we had one this year, which is a very well-known brand, $200 million plus company, and the money center lender was in there, and they just went way over on their over advances, and there was nothing left to save anymore. They preferred that a company just be liquidated. So that's what's happening right now.
Is that liquidation process more difficult today than it used to be?
For some, yeah. For this one, I don't think so, because the intellectual property is quite valuable. Machinery and equipment is still pretty good. But look at all the big retailers that liquidated. What do you do with all the inventory? That's why in many of the Chapter 11s you saw earlier this year in retail, especially, people were putting off paying rent for the first 60 days of the Chapter 11. That's unheard of. They were putting off liquidation of inventory, going out of business sales, because nobody was going to come. So in terms of liquidating retail inventory, it's been very, very difficult during COVID.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. So I'll shift gears just a little bit here and think about when you're dealing with some of the lenders that you're dealing with out there every day that are looking for some help. What has been your approach? What's been the most effective approach from your perspective when the lender is coming to you, whether it be a money center bank or a specialized lender, whatever it might be? What's the best approach that you have found to take in these special situations? And has that approach changed at all because of what we're seeing in today's environment? Or is it the same approach that you've always used?
Same approach. And that approach is communication, and transparency. When we get an assignment, the lender wants to know how they're getting out. How's your refinancing process going? How's your sale process going? We're given milestones very often in a forbearance agreement. Have to be out to market by such and such a date for a refinancing. Have to be out to market by such and such a date for a sale. So the lender or syndicate of lenders wants to know that you are performing under that time frame that you promised for the lenders to see action, because they went out of the credit one way or the other. A financing would be great to take them out. And if not, how you doing on the sale process? You have buyers lined up. When are you going to sign a letter of intent? When are you going to get to a definitive asset purchase agreement? And when are you going to close to take me out? That's what lenders want to know. That's what lenders always want to know. So no different today than it always was.
Okay, that's interesting. I was wondering if there's any type of a difference there at all. And as we talk about what's happening out there through the end of the year, another stimulus package has been delayed. Nothing has been put in place as of yet.
Politics.
And pardon me?
Politics.
And this could be delayed for a number of months at this point. Do you anticipate seeing even greater distress? I would think that you do, but do you anticipate seeing any greater distress accelerating before the end of the year until another stimulus package is put together, or will it stay pretty steady until then?
That is a very good question. No one really knows. I think there will be an uptick in distress, special situations, Chapter 11 filings. I think there was a statistic that came out the other day that Chapter 11 filings were way down in the third quarter. I expect that to rise somewhat in the fourth quarter. And I think as debt works its way through whoever is holding that debt, be it a lender, money center lender, commercial finance company, bondholders. I think in the first quarter and second quarter of 21, there will be more activity. And I don't see a stimulus package coming out until, depending on who wins the election, the end of this year, maybe into next year. But the legislature is pretty dysfunctional, as always.
And it seems to be getting more dysfunctional as we speak at this very moment.
Yes.
You answered a question I was going to ask you, and that was, what do you foresee coming up in the new year? But again, you're anticipating some sort of an uptick in Q1,
I do.
Q2.
Debt has to work its way through the system, and I think there will be more activity. I think for everybody in restructuring at large, things have slowed down a lot from the craziness of March through June. But I think it will increase. And like I said, in the mid to lower middle market with multi-generational family-run businesses, there's always challenges. With private equity portfolio companies that are levered to the hilt, which is always the case, there's always challenges, and that's a constant in the universe.
Makes sense. And with that, Scott, unless I've left anything out, I'd like to wrap up the interview. You provided some tremendous insights as to what's happening from the investment banking side related to the middle market and this distressed special situation market. Are there any parting thoughts that you would like to share with our viewers for before we wrap this up?
Well, my usual ending line is drink heavily, but everybody's been doing that so frequently during this pandemic. Just keep on going and come visit us. We're like 15 minutes from you.
I'll be there as soon as this COVID-19 allows us to go and visit people and do what we're supposed to be doing. I promise you that.
All right, all good.
Scott, thanks very much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts with our audience. And I wish you and your team the best. Almost 20 years in business and another 20 years to come. And
amen.
My best to the whole team. And please stay safe.
I will. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.